Hello everyone, Kurt Holford here and welcome back to another episode from Holford Labs. Today we continue on with the foundational concepts of armor, and we're going to be looking at the combat postures that we see throughout the manuscript and potentially what are some of the things that we see with offline and forward on postures and why they may be different factors when it comes down to armor. We're also going to be looking at different kind of variances when it comes down to single or two or doubled up grips, when it comes down to different weapon concepts, which are foundational concepts that allow us to understand some of the postures that are going to be going through when it comes down to the armored sword section, as well as the longer pole arms of lance and also poleaxe. These types of postures right here are going to offer a lot of insight because, in my opinion, a lot of why we stand offline has to deal with the fact that we are trying to welcome things in, but potentially we understand our armor very well, which once again goes right back to Fiore's advice given to us in the very beginning of this manuscript. But before we get into that right here, please like, subscribe, and share with a friend if you've not been a part of this channel before. We'd love to have you on this journey here of Fiore's manuscripts and to help us understand the practice of arms of the 14th century. And that's not possible without viewers like you, and your comments and thoughts and considerations are absolutely welcome here. Don't forget to leave them at the end of the video here or during the video here because we are curious about what you have to say. And we'd like to be able to continue to broaden these types of discussions about these martiality practices, which allow for us to continue to do the work that we're doing here within historical martial arts. So now that I got my piece out the way here, let's get into it.
So last week we talked about how the body can move in different directions and shift. And this way here, basically the volta and the turns and how the body just feels a little bit different when you're wearing armor and how the weight distribution and everything is. We also talked about how swords and other things in the hands also may change as far as weight and how they may feel to us, at least how it feels to me, and I encourage people to feel that as well. But this, again, those are all part of here about the basics of movements and foundations that we've already talked about in previous episodes, but now it's going into being in the protective equipment of the time. So that's a big part about this right here. And again, mind you, every person's body is different. Everyone's kit's a little bit different. And depending on how people do stuff as far as their armor, they may sacrifice certain weight distributions to accommodate certain anatomical things. So I just want to put that out there because not one position is correct. Not one armor type is correct. And not every turn is going to feel the same way to everybody. It's just the possibilities that may be at hand. So, but this week here we're going to be talking about how the sword, the defensive postures that we see within Fiore. Before we get into some of the armored positions, we're going to talk about some of the positions that we know that have been seen already within the Getty, and also why I believe they are offline. The big thing about offline is that, again, what you said before, I can amass weight and power. But the problem is also here is I also have openings and gaps in the body. In certain armor considerations, you may not have folds right here that are below your breastplate. You may have you might just have a breastplate and be double layered with chain. At least what's depicted in some cases. And mind you, some of that might be just that the folds didn't survive the test of time. It's just, but again, that's something right here that, again, what somebody has or is able to find in the battlefield is nothing to consider. But I digress to the point. Reason why I think this right here is, again, we talk about offline positions, right? So the first one I'm going to really talk about is the sort of one-hand position that, we always see this position right here of the sword here is in place, right? Now, a big thing about this right here, about the sword in one hand is, in the 6 dissimilar guards, you have a picture of the guy like this right here, and he says this is also good in and out of armor. I will tell you right now that this posture, I agree with this because the reality is, as you can already tell, and mind you, I'm not having these spalders on, so I might want, if I was fighting in this kit, I might want to have a different setup. But you can already see just how much, there's a lot of protection that's going on here. And there's additional protection, metal upon metal upon metal upon coverage right here, that allows me to optimize, and also to make it so that the sword can come out of place relatively easily when it comes out of nothing, right? So with the sword being down here, let's take a look at this. Because again, we've talked about before, this position, I don't believe that Fiore is telling people to fight like this back. I think, again, a realistic thing right there is, on the line, is just a slight turn like this. And this right here puts the sword in space right here. So I have ways to be able to deflect low area shots. I also have my gauntlet in the way here. There may be chainmail on this in other time situations, but you can already see how much lighter and protected this is. I'm holding this with relative ease because, again, armor weighs something. So if this is laying on the ground, the sword's on the ground, I'm not expending any energy to maintain this structure. The only thing that's really maintained a little bit is this leg right here, because I'm almost doing a squat. But it's not as much. And if I bend the leg here and really put it in place, you can tell it's relatively easy to maintain. But this position here also allows, and we'll see this later on when we talk about lance and everything else, because again, this is not something that is unique just to the sword. As we'll see later on, being like this, if this is a lance or an axe position, that goes down the rest of the shaft of the lance or the axe. And it's also in between the legs, which allows protection to ward off any openings that may not be covered in plate. So those are some things right there about the offline position right here. I'm right here because the reality is I am poised for offense and defense at the same time. I can shift and move easily and keep myself protected. Depending on what I have here, back of my leg is most of the time really protected. I can keep the sword here in place. It's very easy to modulate. It's not a problem, right? And I have the ability to strike out with relative ease and keep myself tight. And you can see as I go into Portaferro, as I step back, this leg is covered and the sword here is in a low spot. Once again, that really kind of optimizes the defense of the posture, of the structure. So regardless of if I am fighting with a sword in one hand or a sword in two hands, whatever the case may be, the reality is my posture offline here protects me. If I extend, my under armor right here is protecting me as well. So I have something that protects me along the underside of the body. You can see how my bell cops, which I think these are from Arm Street. I think they replicate 14th century finger gauntlets pretty well. But you can see how, once again, I have a shield on my hand, which allows for optimizing of protection. The back portion of the gauntlet acts like a buckler in a way. Then it comes out towards a strike that I might be going against. And because the sword weight is not nearly as intense as it would be if I'm unarmored, this is a lot easier to shift in all directions because of how I'm able to cast me up as lighter because the rest of my body is heavier. So that's why this position in here is so optimal for the sword in one hand. But it doesn't just stop there now, does it? Because in many of the offline positions that we see for Fiore's sword in two hands, they start to do a similar thing. Like we'll talk about this here in upcoming weeks about the vera croce. And once again, you can kind of see like now the tip's down, but it's also in a way that allows me to protect the body. Other half sword positions. Once again, leg is forward, hands right here, back of the hands are protection. I have a lot of reinforcing right here. And if I'm not wearing falls, my arm is in the way, which allows me to keep guarded against thrust to my midsection. Let's talk about an extended sword position, which one he specifically says is good for an armor, and that's posta breve. Now, posta breve is very light. It's considered a stable position that is unstable, has no stability. The big thing about this right here is that if someone is, it's very easy to turn the blade across right here, which is why I think that's why it's unstable. But being right here in this position, this has, if I was holding posta longa, and you can, this is not comfortable. Like this is a lot to hold out on somebody. Whereas keeping it right here, this is a lot tighter to the body. I'm optimizing the fence. You can see once again, the gauntlets are doing their job. It's tight to the body here, and I can walk in with relative great defense because I have projection and my armor is working with me. So those pieces right there in general allow for a frontal deflection concept. Now a big thing about this right here that I think is very important for people to think about is that when we start talking about breastplates and different types of body armor, this one is relatively flat and square to the chest. So it might be beneficial for me to take a frontal position like this, because this is not glancing necessarily right into the armpits, as you might see with a breastplate, which is rounded or may have some of the ridges right here. Because if I go like this and I'm walking in, to strike that is to find the opening right to the armpit or into the midsection of the body. So those are all consideration factors when it comes to body displacement and shifting of armor. That might be one of the reasons why you see a position like this, because with the curvature, I now have a way of being able to deflect and turn. This is more square to the target, whereas here, if I'm like this, it deflects in. So these kind of positions right here that are offline work with the totality of the body structure itself and allow for it to work both as for offensive and defensive purposes, but also with the weight distribution. And that's why I think right here, as far as when it comes down to the different grips, let's talk about the offline position here. And again, this is not hard to get up into some of these other positions. Even with Spalders on, this is not necessarily that difficult. You see all the swords in two-hand positions are there, available to us, and they all off right here. If you just watch the motion, they kind of almost make like this rotation back and forth, which also becomes like this wheel of steel that's deflecting incoming attacks.
So as you can see in the video, again, we're combining concepts we said like last time about how the posture, movement, and everything within armor, and how everything kind of funnels a little bit, right? Well, in that space, if I'm going to tilt myself in different directions, the sword, one thing I did not say in the video is the sword, or whatever I have in my hand, can optimize that centralization of mass to the body, which allows for certain things to happen and opportunity-wise during the duress of combat or the play that comes with it. And I think that's a big part that is important to reconcile with this, because it's not just about athletically pushing forward. It's also about understanding how gravitationally and the physics that come behind a body moving towards and against another opponent. And those are parts right there that I think are very important to analyze and look at, because essentially, when we're talking about opening up or creating postures and everything else, there comes a point where we have to understand that if someone is not going to just give us an opening, we have to move. And that comes into the point where I was talking before about these offline and online postures. Because again, at the end of the day, I think in many cases, I know I certainly did, in many cases, we have this mentality that to do armor, you have to have this full set of armor right here. And that you have to have exactly these falls, exactly this breastplate, and these forearms and everything else. But the reality is, I think in many ways, there's also kind of a shift in that, because what kind of helmets do people have? One thing I love about the Getty is that in many cases, we see a variety of different types of helmets and configurations of kit that are laid out in usage against other opponents, either in place, sometimes the helmet's on, sometimes the helmet's off. I don't necessarily think this is just just an artistic thing. I think that I think what Fiore was trying to depict is that it's very likely that people came to the field with what they had. Helmets got knocked off. Some people had really lots of good money to be able to go out there with the height of fashion when it came down to armor, but some also didn't. And that's a part right there that, again, so if you know your kit, then it makes sense to be able to optimize posture structure-wise to your game of play. So the offline positions, as you can see, the forearm protection of arm harness really works very well about protecting that low area. And while absolutely someone can still stab me there, they still have to get there. And that's a part right there that if we're talking about a body structure where the weight distribution is like this, if someone lunges, there's a really good chance that I can play in spots where if you lunge at me and try to go for my hip area and you miss, that could be very fatal and it has serious consequences to what your outcome of the fight would be. So again, having an offline position, it may look like it's easy just to hit, but again, it offers optimal positioning for strength buildup, to be able to power shots, but also protection in the process as well. And like I said in the video, I really do believe that it really works with the geometry of the curvature of the armor, both arms and body armor, that for the period of time. And again, if we're talking about the kind of armor that is augmenting and assisting into chainmail, and not the later period pieces, nothing wrong with them at all. But again, we're talking about earlier pieces. There's a little bit segmented position right in between things here, so there's a little bit more movement, at least from what I've seen and experienced. And I leave it to you, dear viewers, to please Share your perspectives if you've had a different one on that. So when it comes down to this concept and observation of armor, those online and offline positions, you have a lot of protection in that space. And we consider also how we can optimize offense and defense at the same time. Now, tactical strategies about this is also another part that once again goes back to Fiore's beginning advice. And one of the reasons why I say this is because if I'm a person that goes out there and maybe I have, I don't know, an open face bassinet, maybe I just have elbow cups, maybe I just have chainmail that comes over top here, and then, forearms and gauntlets, and as far as like an arm piece. And maybe I just have a breastplate that comes up to my aventail, and then I have no folds. Well, I know where I'm not armored. And that is a very important thing to understand, because knowing where I'm not armored, that is the place where I'm most likely to have attacks come at me. And once again, this to me really embodies the concept of, okay, if I know where attacks may be coming at because that's where the opening is in the armor, then I can start applying the game to that. If we think about some of the thrusts that Fiore shows later on, when it comes, it's all low thrusting. I know there's been comments before about this being stabs to the abdomen. Well, this absolutely may be the case. I also feel like he's talking about below folds, the groin, the hip, and other areas right there, because those are ways to turn somebody around and to fold them into different types of directions while you're in a fight. And because armor requires hip and groin opening, because this is for riders, not just for like foot fighting, right? Then there has to be a little bit of opening right there, which means that that's a spot where somebody may try to topple somebody over. And again, if I topple this over, the biostructure goes down. So that's really just the kind of observations I have about this offline positioning, the front positioning, and what it does with different kind of concepts of arms and armor. And again, like the suit that I'm wearing right here, it's still pretty robust for all intents and purposes. But without shoulders and everything else, I may not have all the openings that people come at me and offer, because at the end of the day, as they're trying to hit these spots, I may want to play a little bit more defensive because it's easier for me to move because of the limitations of those armor pieces. And that becomes a part of my tactical strategy, because once again, it goes back to the advice of Fiore. Look at the opponent. Do they take up a position of Armizare? I.e., do they know what they're doing? And then know yourself and assess what you have to do for it. So that's going to do it for this video right here. Please, like I said before, leave a comment below. I'm very curious to hear what people have to say about this, because the more I get into the practice of armor, the more of the entirety of the manuscript makes so much sense to me. Because at the end of the day here, I know it's a lot when it comes down to mechanics, functions, everything else. But if the main event was the knight in armor, well, at least for earlier periods of time, it makes a lot of sense why these things right here are almost like huge, like tech nodes. It's like being like an airplane, right? And you have to make sure that certain systems are working before you launch it. At least that's what my experience was when I was in the Marine. And I feel like it's the same thing for this right here. We're like, okay, does this work here? Okay, I have to abandon this. Now I have to fight differently because I know I can't mess around, because this is for my life or my fortune or my name. So, like I said, leave a comment. Let me know what your thoughts are out there, everybody. And again, as always, until I see you, please stay safe out there, train well, and fight on. I'll see you all soon.